Hello everyone and welcome back to science class. My name is Elio. This is The Florist, where I sit on the floor and talk about science. In today's episode, we'll be discussing Should You Meet Your Heroes, Rosalind Franklin edition. So let's get into it. Rosalind Franklin was born on July 25th in 1920 in Notting Hill, England, to a Jewish-British family. She's the second oldest of 5 siblings and the eldest daughter, and you can tell by the way she does not f*** around. I'm the son of an eldest daughter, I have an older sister, and I'm dating an eldest daughter, and let me tell ya, they don't f*** around. Anyways, it became exceedingly clear to everybody that Rosalind Franklin was very smart. In fact, in a letter that Helen Bentwich, her aunt, wrote to her husband, she described Franklin as, quote, alarmingly clever. She spends all of her time doing arithmetic for pleasure and invariably gets her sums right. Her family had the means to send her to very good private schools, including St. Paul's Girls' School, which is one of the few schools at the time that taught physics and chemistry. There, Franklin excelled at everything except for music, which apparently she was so bad at that her music teacher, who also happened to be Gustav Holst, wrote to her parents and asked if she had hearing issues or tonsillitis. Yikes. She started studying chemistry at Newnham College in 1938, and only 1 year later, World War II would break out. After earning her degree, she kept doing research at Newnham without much success due to apparently the alcoholism and indecisiveness of her boss, Ronald Norrish, which eventually drove her to resign from his lab in 1942. At this time, World War II was in full swing, and Great Britain required its citizens to contribute to the war effort through national service. By now, Franklin knew her strengths, so she did this by taking a job at the British Coal Utilization Research Association, where she studied the porosity of coal and determined that substances were expelled in order of molecular size as temperature increased. There she realized, wow, I'm really fucking good at this, so she wrote a thesis about it, earning her a PhD. Her work at BCURA inevitably helped the classification of coal and accurately predicted its performance for fuel purposes, and perhaps more importantly, led to the production of effective gas masks, which was obviously extremely crucial for World War II. Eventually, after the war, she started working for Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique, or CNRS, in Paris, and the head of the lab that she was working for was a guy named Jacques Mering. Mering was an engineer, but more importantly to Franklin, an X-ray crystallographer. Wow, Elio, what is that? Chill, I'm getting there, okay? X-ray crystallography is the experimental science of determining the molecular and atomic structure of a crystal. And in this case, a crystal is a material whose constituents are arranged in a highly ordered structure. An X-ray crystallographer would do this by shooting a beam of X-rays at something, say a strand of DNA, and the crystalline structure would diffract the rays in specific directions. And by measuring the angles and intensities of diffraction, an X-ray crystallographer can produce a 3D picture of electron density. So imagine pointing a laser at a diamond and seeing the beam diffract throughout the stone. You could theoretically figure out the cut of the diamond by measuring the location and intensity of the diffracted beams. It's kind of like that, but way smaller and much more complicated. So Franklin learned how to do that, and she used it to analyze the structures of things like coal and graphite. Her work basically led to the coal grading system, and she coined the terms graphitizing and non-graphitizing carbon. So she did that for a while, and then in 1950, she got a 3-year fellowship to work at King's College in London. She started working there in 1951, and she was the only experienced X-ray crystallographer there, and thus her PI, principal investigator of the lab, aka her boss, Maurice Wilkins, almost immediately redirected her to work on the X-ray diffraction of DNA fibers and try and discover the structure of DNA, which was highly debated at the time. Wilkins even gave her a little grad student assistant, Raymond Gosling, as a treat. And soon she was messing with different conditions for her X-ray crystallography photos and was taking better quality pictures than everyone else because she was that girl. And in fact, she was so much of that girl that she apparently put off a lot of the men working in her lab, including her PI, Wilkins. She's described as having, quote, an air of cool superiority, which cope, I guess. Anyways, she almost immediately discovered evidence of a spiral DNA structure and concluded a few things, including that a straight, untwisted DNA chain was highly unlikely and that the phosphate group in DNA had to lie outside the main DNA chain. However, at this point, she was still uncertain if there were 2, 3, or even 4 chains in a DNA molecule, but she later did rule out 4 chains as a possibility. So it's 1951, and Franklin and Gosling are working on DNA structure, but let me introduce you to 2 key players in this story. Around this time, 2 guys named James Watson and Francis Crick are working at the Cavendish lab in Cambridge and were trying to build a molecular model of DNA. Based off of a lecture that Franklin gave that they attended, they knew that DNA was probably helical with either 2 or 3 strands, so they built a triple helix model, which Franklin took one look at and was like, LOL, no, that's wrong, because they put the phosphate on the inside of the helix, but due to its hydrophilic nature, it wants to be on the outside. And this, my friends, brings us to the renowned Photo 51. So, in 1952, Franklin and Gosling are taking X-ray crystallography photos when they captured the famous Photo 51, which made it apparent to Franklin that DNA was a double-stranded helix. How they got double-stranded helix from this photo, I will never know, because I'm not that girl. Anyways, also, let me be so clear that X-ray crystallography photographs could take days to capture. You had to take the photo in a series of different conditions, and that's not counting the hours of DNA prep that went into each photo. I mean, the pivotal photo 51 that Franklin and Gosling produced had an exposure time of 62 hours. That's more than 2 days. It takes so much work to make one of these photos. Okay. So at this point, Franklin and Gosling are confident that DNA is a double helix and are doing the work to corroborate their research so they can publish their findings. By January of 1953, Franklin had already written a bunch of drafts about the double helix backbone of DNA, and this is where goes crazy. Because do you remember James Watson? Yeah. So Watson goes to King's College, where Franklin works, to talk to Wilkins, Franklin's PI, because this other guy, Linus Pauling, had written an incorrect proposal of DNA structure. So Watson couldn't initially find Wilkins, so he went to Franklin's lab instead, and he basically came to her and was like, this guy, Linus Pauling, is wrong, and we should team up and work on this before he realizes that he's wrong so that we can get a head start and figure out the structure of DNA before he does and get all the credit, instead of telling him that he's wrong or inviting him to work with us. Anyways, then he proceeded to insinuate that Franklin didn't know how to interpret her own work, which of course pissed her off, and the ensuing commotion finally attracted Wilkins. So now Wilkins and Watson are talking, and Wilkins is like, yeah, that sucks. I hate women. Also, look at this photo. And he shows Watson photo 51 without Franklin's knowledge or consent. And it is this that sparked Watson and Crick to start building a double helical model. Watson and Crick were also given a bunch of Franklin's crystallographic calculations, which they used to confirm the relative distance and symmetry of DNA base pairs. They even did some cool science all by themselves and suggested the complementary nature of base pairs and that one strand of DNA was a complementary template for the other. This essentially gave them everything they needed to build their model. They correctly built a model and published it in April of 1953, citing a general knowledge of Franklin and Wilkins' contribution, which of course is the understatement of the century because they literally had just enough specific information to base their model off of. Don't piss me off! Franklin and Gosling's data was published in the same issue, essentially confirming that the double helical model was correct. I don't know if I can properly convey how fucking frustrating this was and is. Franklin discovered the structure of DNA first. She beat Watson and Crick by several months, but because her PI showed Watson her and Gosling's work without her knowledge or consent, again, they were able to rush, build, and publish a model that subsequently got all the credit for discovering the structure of DNA. Franklin was also extremely intentional about what she published and was generally anti-model building until she had a definitive answer for if it was chemically correct. Watson and Crick did not follow the same standard. They built what they thought was correct and only were able to confirm it by using Franklin's data, again without her knowledge or consent, which led to her never being properly credited, which pisses me off. Anyways, after that little fiasco, she moved from King's College to Birkbeck in 1953 and did research on RNA, which was very important to understanding numerous RNA crop viruses like tobacco mosaic virus and cucumber virus. 3 years later, in 1956, she started working on the live polio virus, trying to decipher its structure, which was actually extremely fucking dangerous, but she simply did not give a shit. It was during this time when she started to suspect that she had some health problems, and not long after, she had to stop working due to her declining health. And in September of the same year, an operation revealed 2 tumors in her abdomen. She was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, and she died on April 16, 1958 at only 37 years old. It's thought that her prolonged and repeated exposure to X-rays either caused or accelerated her cancer, and she was survived by both of her parents and all 4 of her siblings. May her memory continue to be a blessing. Despite her crucial work, Franklin was never nominated for a Nobel Prize, while Watson, Crick, and Wilkins were all awarded Nobel Prizes in 1962. And since 1974, the Nobel Foundation does not award posthumous prizes. One of the biggest problems I have with Franklin's story is the difference in quality of work. Throughout her career, Franklin was extremely deliberate and would only publish things if she felt certain that she had the evidence to back it up. This is juxtaposed by Watson and Crick, who were still uncertain of their work when they had it published, which, in my opinion, details an extreme difference in quality of work. Linus Pauling, the guy who Watson tried to fuck over in 1953 and who later won a Nobel Peace Prize, even said, quote, "It might well be premature to make an award of a prize to Watson and Crick because of existing uncertainty about the detailed structure of nucleic acid. I myself feel that it is likely that the general nature of the Watson-Crick structure is correct, but that there is doubt about the details." Of course, their model did end up being correct, but in my opinion, it's shitty science to guess and hope for the best, especially when you're only doing so to get credit, which is evident through Watson's attempts to fuck over Linus Pauling. This stealing of credit, while not a new phenomenon, was certainly exacerbated by the blatant sexism of the 1950s. Rosalind Franklin worked in a male-dominated field, was smarter and harder working than a lot of her colleagues, and did not cater to men to make them feel comfortable. I would argue that this is why so many men described her as rude and off-putting, because she refused to discount or downplay her own intelligence and prowess to conform with the submissive homemaker stereotype forced upon women. And despite all of this, the sexism that Franklin experienced is often still described as alleged. Like, okay? She knew she was smart and she knew she was good at what she did, but I only wish the world had treated her better. Also, I really don't want to talk about Watson and Crick more than I have to, but Watson in particular did a lot of things that piss me off. In his book, he mocks and demeans Franklin, nicknaming her Rosie, which is a nickname she did not like. He wrote about her in almost entirely negative light, and the objectification is insane. He critiques her clothes, her makeup, her career choices, and her attitude, and he also critiqued his other colleagues like Wilkins and Crick, but his comments about Franklin are the worst. This is a quote from Watson's own book. By choice, she did not emphasize her feminine qualities. There was never lipstick to contrast with her straight black hair. While at the age of 31, her dresses showed all the imagination of English blue-stocking adolescents. So it was quite easy to imagine her as the product of an unsatisfied mother who unduly stressed the desirability of professional careers that could save bright girls from marriages to dull men. Clearly, Rosie had to go or be put in her place. The thought could not be avoided that the best home for a feminist was another person's lab. I hate this guy. Also, if you think his rampant sexism only affects women, think again, because this is also another direct quote from Watson. I think having all these women around makes it more fun for the men, but they're probably less effective. I mean, he's even discounting and reducing men to some sort of animalistic Neanderthals that can't control themselves when they're around women. Like, be normal! Oh my God. He was also extremely racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, ableist, and fatphobic. He literally believed, among other crazy things, that black people were intellectually inferior to white people, that all South Asians were servile, and that all East Asians were conformist, which resulted in him being stripped of a bunch of honorary titles later in life. In an interview with The Times, he was, quote, inherently gloomy about the prospect of Africa because all our social policies are based on the fact that their intelligence is the same as ours, whereas all the testing says, not really. Then he added, people who have to deal with black employees find this is not true. He also said some anti-Semitism is justified. These are his own words, by the way. Some other crazy random shit he said includes, quote, if we knew our son would develop schizophrenia, we wouldn't have had him. And, quote, we should perform genome-wide association studies of women who have given up their children for adoption in order to find the loveless gene. The irony is just... okay. All right, last one, I promise. In 1997, he allegedly argued that women should be allowed to abort fetuses that carried a gay gene, should one ever be discovered. I feel like it's hard to piss off the gay community and the anti-abortion community with one comment, and yet, just a shit human overall, allegedly. But this video is not about him, so... Anyways, because of her story, Franklin has posthumously been deemed the Dark Lady of DNA and the Sylvia Plath of molecular biology. And while it's fantastic that she started to get the recognition that she deserves, her story is a great example of how the work and achievements of women in POC are often attributed to white men, if credited at all. Any woman who's worked in science, actually, dare I say, any woman ever can tell you a similar story. And if such a famous and momentous landmark in science went misattributed for so long, imagine how much other invisible labor is being miscredited. Be aware of who writes history and the narratives they want to convey. Slightly depressing, but food for thought nonetheless. Anyways, thank you all for coming to science class. My name is Elio, this was The Florist, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. We almost immediately discovered evidence. Chill. So it's 1951, and Ryan. Oh my God, okay. And he shows Watson a photo of photo 51 without freaking, oh my God. Oh my God, okay. Oh, it just pisses me off. It just pisses me off so bad. Without her knowledge and consent, which resulted in her never being properly credited. This pisses me off. Damn it. I hate this guy. Slightly depression. Thank you for coming to...